My name is Emily Briones, and this is Texas La Raza Unida Party, a radical unifier of the Chicano Movement, prepared as part of the class intro to Chicanx Latinx Histories, History 17CH-PO at the Claremont Colleges. When the Texas La Raza Unida Party, or RUP, was created, the Chicano Movement was already underway. During this time, Chicanos, especially young ones, rediscovered their history, language, and culture in hopes of redefining their identity as a Mexican in America. From there, an era of protestation against the injustices the Chicano community faced began. Naturally, frustration would rise just as strongly alongside these protests, largely influencing this revolutionary time period. These feelings are clearly shown in a 1972 Sunday newspaper, where RUP's leader, Angel Gutierrez, would say, "We're fed up. We ignore the pleas of all those people and posture ourselves in an independent stance." Gutierrez may not have set out to do so, but his comment embodied the frustrations the Chicano movement carried, giving us a window into this time period. While frustration alone could push the Chicano movement forward, it would also pave the way for individuals to take the movement many different directions. The Chicano movement would be ununified, consisting of a large number of different organizations with their own goals. Still, the Chicano movement created a new social climate that set the stage for Jose Angel Gutierrez and 5 other young Chicano student activists to create RUP's predecessor, the Mexican American Youth Organization, or MAYO. The group's main concern was that Mexican organizations that had been around quite a while in Texas weren't actually creating social change. MAYO quickly became an assertive organization of organizers that mainly focused on educational and social issues. It was only when the Democratic Party criticized MAYO as being a racist, militant organization that the group became interested in being involved politically. This was because Mayo's resources had been drained by such criticism. Gutierrez himself proposed creating a Chicano third party. The group's leaders put down Gutierrez's idea twice, but Gutierrez moved forward in Crystal, Texas. In Crystal, students of White High School, a mainly Mexican school, began protesting. The school's administrators had allowed 3 white cheerleaders and only 1 new Mexican cheerleader to be chosen, so the students took their demands to the district superintendent. They eventually added other demands, like the establishment of a bilingual and bicultural program. Gutierrez became very involved, leading the Crystal boycott. As the town became overcome with student protests and community meetings that gained national attention, Gutierrez established the Ciudadanos Unidos organization in Crystal. The organization would become one of the most powerful Mexican grassroots, or volunteer-based, political organizations in Texas. With this momentum, Gutierrez finally got MAYO support for his Chicano Party idea in December of 1969. Gutierrez's idea for a national search of self-determination and community control inspired many, but the idea of a Chicano third party was still very much radical. The Sunday newspaper mentioned before alludes to this idea. In it, Gutierrez says, "What choice? The choice was for or against the Democratic Party. In other words, the two-party system simply had too much power. But why?" For one, RUP could only get minimal and often negative news coverage in the media. Most of the print and electronic media were owned by white people who preferred the 2 major parties. In terms of financing, the Federal Election Campaign Act provided public funding for the 2 major parties and very rarely eligible third parties. So the RUP depended on time-draining community events to raise campaign funds. The Democratic Party would also legally attack RUP's campaigns. Perhaps most importantly, since the Great Depression, the Democratic Party was presented as the party of the poor, and the Republican Party the party of the rich. With the limited choices that had been presented to them, Mexican Americans were loyal to the Democratic Party. Despite all these setbacks, the La Raza Unida Party managed to be successful in Crystal, Texas and its surrounding areas. As Gutierrez said in the previously mentioned Sunday newspaper, "We've been played with because of traditional leaders." Gutierrez had used the town people's frustrations to convince them that only by controlling Crystal's school board and city council would real change happen. The RUP was an alternative that many Mexicans began to favor over the Democratic Party that only seemed to care for them during times of election. From there, by 1970, the county of Crystal and the surrounding counties of Cotulla, Carrizo Springs, and Hidalgo County ran candidates for county offices, school board, and city council. RUP ran its campaign through Gutierrez's Ciudadanos Unidos organization. A few weeks before the elections, the white people of these counties began to feel threatened, and a powerful legal battle followed. Effective strategies used included finding minor reasons for disqualification, selecting Mexican candidates that could easily be controlled to run as Democrats, labeling RUP candidates as unqualified, and presenting Gutierrez as a militant radical. These strategies are especially clear in the aforementioned Sunday newspaper, where prominent Mexican-American Democratic representatives, who were likely picked because of their potential influence on the Mexican community, accused Gutierrez of radicalism. These men would point to Gutierrez's aggressiveness and involvement with MAYO. However, considering the threat RUP was to the Democratic Party, perhaps this aggressiveness was simply passion, born of frustrations that had built up into the Chicano Movement, MAYO, and now RUP, under a more united vision. Ultimately, RUP was able to claim victory in all counties except Hidalgo County. The most impressive changes happened in Crystal, Texas. Here, the party presented a united front, requiring absolute loyalty. This applied to Mexicans as well. With the party's ideals well established in Crystal, Mexicans would take almost every single high-ranking administrative position. Mexicans also established more businesses during this time. Considering the party initially gained momentum around education, the new school board pushed to ensure that all of the students' previous demands were met. For example, bilingual and bicultural education was now offered, and teachers and counselors were encouraged to use techniques that kept students engaged. It helped a lot that the new school board was more willing to accept and seek government funding. Perhaps most importantly, Crystal, Texas became a city full of civic participants, as Ciudadanos Unidos worked with other organizations to actively involve the community. The successes in Crystal, Texas would push other states like Colorado, Arizona, California, and New Mexico to create their own, somewhat more loosely structured version of RUP. Still, unfortunately, RUP would struggle and would ultimately fall apart in all states. Internal problems contributed to RUP's end. However, some of the largest reasons for RUP's end can be tied back again to the two-party system's overwhelming power and the end of the Chicano Movement. After all, the movement had created the space for RUP to grow. Still, history cannot erase that Mexicans, especially in Crystal, Texas, had proved themselves capable of politically organizing, governing, and controlling their own destiny under one platform that could and would reach a larger amount of Chicano activists than ever before. Mexicans had done so while putting up a good fight against the all-powerful Democratic Party, which for decades, as Gutierrez visually described it in the 1972 Sunday newspaper, had kept Mexicans in political captivity.